Sudah siap? Pak Haji siap? Zidan siap? Oke, kita mulai ya. Oke, coba dilihat, aku akan mulai, aku akan open. Nanti habis itu aku panggil Mbak Tintin. Oke. Alright. Hello. Hi, good afternoon everyone. Welcome to Museum Macan. It's very good to see you here to start the year. I'm Ninjani, Curator of Education and Public Programs of Museum Macan, and today I'll be your host for this event. Thank you so much for making time and coming all the way here for our very first public program of the year 2024. Today we will have a very special performance lecture by Tintin Wulia. But before that, I'd like to share some information and also some house rules for today. So the first one is that this event is recorded and documented and is also going to be live streamed on Museum Macan YouTube. And secondly, this event will consist of a 30-minute lecture followed by a Q&A later on. So for the next hour, please remain seated and ensure that your phone is on silent. And then this public program will be held in English. And at the end of the program, we would really appreciate it if you could take some time to fill in a feedback survey so that we can improve our programming. So that's pretty much the general information. And also, if you would like to take, please take a comfortable seat. So you can watch the session later on more comfortably. So now, please allow me to introduce our performance for this performance lecture, Tintin Wulia. She is an artist and researcher at HDK Falun Academy of Art and Design, University of Gothenburg, Sweden. And she is practicing transnationally, and she has been examining the complexities of borders for more than 2 decades. Tintin Wulia sees the world as an interconnected system, not a borderless world, but a world where entities interface with one another contiguously. And her works through video, sound, paintings, drawings, dance, text, installation, performance, and public interventions mostly aim to tease out and activate these interconnections. And Tintin has contributed to over 200 international exhibitions and publications, including Istanbul Biennale in 2005, Moscow Biennale in 2011, Guangzhou Biennale in 2012, Sharjah Biennale 2013, and Chicago Architecture Biennale 2021. And her works are also part of prominent public collections worldwide, including the Queensland Art Gallery and Gallery of Modern Art, and Stedelijk Fine Art Museum and He Xiangning Art Museum. And in 2017, Wulia represented Indonesia with a solo pavilion at the 57th Venice Biennale. So for today, she will have a performance called Memory is Frail and Truth Brittle. This performance is based on the eponymous installation of 115 charcoal and graphite drawings that the artist made in 2019, which was in turn based on illustrated article published in 2018. It questions the nature of reality and the building block of human knowledge, which is perceived mainly through humankind's limited senses, and the main part of which is the eye. At an allegorical level, it interrogates how our understanding of the world is largely constructed visually and recorded through memory, and how these are prone to manipulation, for example, state propaganda and isolated versions of state-sanctioned history. So without further ado, please give a very warm welcome to Tintin Wulia.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I'll just start.
Might be enhanced to their version 1.1 design. As everything is wrong, whichever direction you walk away to, you can't avoid getting back to the starting place where you began.
The best time to set out on such adventures is on a summer day.
You might argue that the pointing can never be repeated. Therefore, no 2 points can be exactly the same, as time will have lapsed in a trip between the 2.
A new world comes into being.
However, memory is frail and truth brittle.
It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon. The TV was on, and a film showed a small white airplane crashing into the White House. Hollywood, I thought, is a legend in devising different realities, and wow, who would have come up with such an act of violence? We are so fragile, I thought, and as though agreeing with me that life is indeed so fragile, my mind replayed the familiar scene so innocently, one of my recurrent wakeful dreams. When I was walking along a crowded street, when suddenly someone stabbed me in the stomach with an insignificant knife. Insignificant but sufficient. Death, ladies and gentlemen, is not really dramatic. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, plants and animals, it happens to everyone. That evening, I saw another thing on TV. At first, I thought it was still that film. The camera work, though, was not as controlled. And that was when I realized that it was really a news report. It was real. Someone had actually crashed an airplane into something. Not the White House, but something similarly significant. I was astonished. Did they watch the film I saw earlier that afternoon? Were they inspired by that film, or did they inspire that film? Which came first, the reality or the film? For a second, I thought of Orson Welles' The War of the Worlds. From 16,327 kilometers away, I didn't recognize the tower on the screen. It was a mere tower, which to me only became christened with meanings when it was destroyed. A teacher in Samira Magmalbaf's film God, Construction and Deconstruction later tried to expound that tower to a bunch of school kids in Afghanistan. I later felt I could have been any one of them. That Sunday, when panic-stricken listeners tried to escape from the first Martian attacks on the US, my father was trying to climb a ladder some 14,000 kilometers and an international dateline away. He was only a few months over 1 year old, an agile young toddler whose presence I can only imagine as his babyhood, unlike mine, has left no traces on photographs. But knowing him and looking at photographs of myself at his age when the Martians first invaded the US, I deduced that he must have been trying to climb a ladder that day. A few months over 1 year old. The next slide, please. Perhaps the earliest photograph of my father was taken when he was approximately 9. This photograph was only found after he died, some 60-ish years later. In it, he was showing off his contortionist skill, a skill that I never knew he had. He looked so much at ease. Looking at the photograph, another part of his life revealed itself to me. He had always been a performer, the eldest son of my grandfather, the performer, who led his traveling troupe performing plays around the village of Bali. My father's first stage experience was as a crying boy. Just go up to the stage, say that you're hungry, ask for a banana to eat, and then cry, okay? That's his script for the night. I imagine it wasn't difficult to imagine hunger. My father had told me stories of when a luxurious meal meant sharing a single egg with the whole family, 8 siblings and his parents, and a few others. They went on stage, so he went on stage, stupefied, but by all the eyes on him, asked for a banana, said that he's hungry, and then cried. Not of hunger, but of stage fright. He was praised as his crying looked so real. Such a talent, right? So I thought of my grandfather, the theater maker, showing a boy crying of hunger to the villagers, his audience that evening, who might have been in near famine. What was he trying to say with the rest of the play? In his contortionist photograph, my father was not alone. There were 2 other boys, his younger siblings. My second uncle, as I heard, was a great painter. He was so good, I was told, that he received a prize from the People's Social and Cultural Movement associated with the left. So after my grandfather was disappeared in 1965, understandably and sadly, my second uncle quit painting. My fourth uncle, the boy with no front teeth in the background, was known in town as a walking encyclopedia. When I was 8, he presented existentialism to me via a pinch on my arm. Ouch, I screamed. Does it hurt? Of course it hurts. Are you sure? Are you sure it's not merely your brain telling you that it hurts? That was an epiphany. I got excited to be able to know, to be able to think that I might have just been a thought floating around in the ether of my brain, and that everything, including myself, and including my brain, might not be real. So this gave me permission to leave my body behind, including my slant eyes, which I hated so much, because so many people seem to hate me just because of them.
Essentieel tentang physical cognition. Essentieel and physical cognition.
It is the time you have wasted for your rose that makes your rose so important. Men have forgotten this truth, but you must not forget it. You become responsible forever for what you have tamed. When everyone sleeps, does reality still take place? This is a hard question to answer because I bet there has never been a moment where everyone, and by that I mean every single creature in our universe, dead and alive, including their tiny atoms, slept at the same time. At the launch of Universe version 1.1, the biblical gods must have sneaked out of their rest day and made the universe round and made everything go round and round in it, and thus created time and all the different time zones as well, not to mention all the different bubbles of realities, which makes a very smart design. The biblical gods really made sure that at each single moment, someone would be awake to get at least one reality going, wild enough to fuel time. This smart design was a result of learning. Once upon a time, during Universe version 1.0, at one extraordinary point, everyone went to sleep exactly at the same time. At that point, time mysteriously stopped, although what really happened was never disclosed. The error 500 was carefully documented to be avoided in the next version of the universe. So the problem was solved with the orb-shaped structure that underlies everything. For example, no matter what the outer shapes of our eyes are, our eyeballs are orb-shaped, which made way for the different realities to coexist. The best time to set out on such an adventure is on a summer day. The place, perhaps it should be called a stroll into unfamiliar worlds, worlds strange to us, not known to other creatures, manifold and varied as the animals themselves. The best time to set out on such an adventure is on a summer day. The place of flower-strewn meadows, humming with insects, fluttering with butterflies. Here we may glimpse the world of the lowly dwellers of the meadow. To do so, you must first blow, in fancy, a soap bubble around each creature to represent its own world, filled with the perceptions which it alone knows. When we ourselves then step into one of these bubbles, the familiar meadow is transformed. Many of its colorful features disappear. Others no longer together, but appear in new relationships. A new world comes into being. Through the bubble, we see the world of the burrowing worm, of the butterfly, or of the field mouse, the world as it appears to the animals themselves, not as it appears to us. This is what we call the phenomenal world of the self-worth of the animal. It might have been fear that prevented me from talking with Ilham about 1965, when he was my senior at architecture school. Which kind of fear it was, I don't know. Was it a fear of illicit engagement of some sort, resulting from discussing 1965, or was it more a fear of Ilham's father, whom the government had portrayed to the whole nation, and especially to my generation, as a chain-smoking demon, the devil himself. It was probably a bit of both, working their ways through my own family secret. One day at uni, I remember, someone whispered to my ears, Ilham is Aidit's son. And that was enough to make me shiver in silence. My memory of Ilham's father, Aidit, was crystal clear. In that film that we all had to watch every year on the last day of September, Aidit was cold-blooded, ambitious, and anxious. He killed everyone. I can't remember whether he won in the end. He must have lost, because wasn't it Suharto who saved the country from the murders of the army generals that Aidit orchestrated? One of the generals had a sweet daughter, Ade Irma Suryani, who was only a few years younger than myself in that film. She was killed. Another daughter, older than me, found her dad's body and hugged him, crying and washing her face with his blood. That's how cruel Aidit was. Never did it cross my mind that my grandfather was lucky not to be elevated as a public enemy of that caliber. For that matter, perhaps I was lucky. As for my grandfather, well, we never know where he ended up or whether he was still alive even. We heard so many stories, both kind and nasty, about the end of his life. I knew though that even if he was still alive, somewhere he might have not cared that the least about being a public enemy. I have done nothing wrong, that's what he said. And that's what he said when the family tried to convince him to leave. The ruins that used to be their home burned to the ground already. That night he was taken away. More than 20 years after uni, I asked Ilham for a story about his father. He chose to tell me such a heartwarming story, the most humanizing story of his father. It reminded me of stories that my father told me about his father. They were stories about a human being. I wonder if it was the instilled feeling of guilt and shame that motivated them, my father and Ilham, to recount the most human stories of their fathers. Either that or their fathers are just human, like us. When asked for a photograph to accompany his story, however, Ilham stumbled. I immediately realized that it must have been a tough request. Ilham's family and their house might have not been burned to the ground, but his household was destroyed when his father was assassinated and when, as a little boy, he was at gunpoint. As with so many people in their position at one point in their lives, the only thing they had left was their souls. And even these might not have been entirely theirs. Just look around online, Ilham said. There is a lovely photograph of my father showing President Sukarno a camera made in Russia. They were both smiling in that picture. That's how close they were. Later, we found that the lovely photograph was an artwork. Everyone in that photograph was photoshopped in. If one falls in the middle of the forest and no one was around to hear it, does it make a sound? If one falls in the middle of a forest and no one is around to photograph it, does one really fall? But then how is it possible for anything to happen with absolutely no one to bear or dare witness? Day by day, these questions eroded Teja Bayu and Hersri within the endless years of their internment. Realizing how precarious reality was, Teja Bayu kept himself sane by reciting any single thing that he could remember so as not to lose his memory. Hersri Setiawan covertly wrote journals after journals of new and newer thoughts, burying them underneath a specimen banana tree, as it was made illegal for them to write or read. Hopefully, one day, these thoughts could be free again, with or without us, he said. For the citizens of Earth, Teja Bayu, Hersri, and many others as well have died, especially because no one on Earth knew anything about the Martian labor camp. They may as well have gone to heaven or hell, as in 2065, a distance of 54.5 million kilometers was still not too different from a distance of 401 million kilometers, or 225 million kilometers for that matter. And no one knew how much further or closer heaven or hell was. Most probably they're in hell because weren't they the demons themselves? Well, everyone on Earth knew though and remembered that in 2065, it was a great year for NASA. That was the year when NASA's administrative operational budget was increased tenfold. In 2079, when the Martian terraforming was completed and Hersri and Teja Bayu were quietly returned to Earth, with hundreds of other political prisoners, no one talked about them. Indeed, the people who would have talked about them were mostly killed or were disappeared, while the rest eagerly shut their mouth in fear to protect their children in a bit of secrecy. Even when their return was the closest thing to a Martian invasion to Earth, albeit a very gentle and humble one, people talked about the excitement of progress and moving forward instead, and of the large astronomical distance being eventually overcome.
Perhaps it should be called a stroll into a newer world.
No one talked about them in 2098 either, when the dictator fell. They did talk about the dictator's fall, though, because everyone had seen it as it was broadcast all over the solar system. In 2112, a documentary film about them hit the headlines. Suddenly, what had happened to them on Mars became real. My friends promptly urged me to watch that film. So I asked them, if one was killed in the middle of the forest and no one know about it, does one continue living? When they scratched their heads, I told them I knew these people. I pretended that I was not one of them to protect myself. But by way of my grandfather, I was really one of them. One story we were told was that he was shot under a tree in a cemetery, squealing like a pig. No one is around to hear that. Does it make a sound? Was my grandfather inspired by that film, or did my grandfather inspire that film? Does the film document reality, or does reality document the film? Which one came first, reality or the film? if I was part of that reality, how should I watch the film? If I were part of that reality, how would the film observe me? The War of the Worlds caused nationwide panic in 1938 because it was performed in a timeline. In a timeline, once a point is gone in time, it's gone. Had people listened to the start of the play where it was announced as a play, they would have understood that it was just a play. Once that starting point was gone, however, over time, the play became part of reality. And the reality of our reality is that it's expanded. It includes voguing and line dances, the wars of the worlds and otherwise, celebrities and people seeking asylum, Facebook betrayals, soccer matches, other people's selfies, my family's fears, your love, their hatred. It includes all their likes, all their fictions, all their facts, and all their myths and faiths, manifold and varied. Men have forgotten this truth, said the fox. In Universe version 1.1, there remains a problem not even the biblical gods have ever been able to solve. Out of so many different kinds of realities, which one is the truth? Well, part of the problem, as they later discovered, is in the question. The question assumes that the truth is amongst these realities, an aspect of them that perhaps shines so brightly, or perhaps sends such strong narrowband radio signal back to Earth, then disappeared like a wow signal, never to be found again. The question also assumes that there is only one truth. For the 33 years of the dictatorship, there was only one solitary, isolated truth. This tower of solitary truth not only disregarded the manifold and varied realities, but also the many lives that hold those realities that could have brought other meanings to the tower and therefore threaten its solidity. In order to assert itself as a solitary truth, the dictatorship had to kill as manifold and varied lives as possible. What it didn't understand was that if the chemistry of our brain can make you believe that you exist, then genetics are not merely physical.
What is essential is invisible to the eye, later transmitted, so that he will be sure to remember.
As thoughts are transferred through so many lives that they eventually become bodiless, or rather independent of bodies, they proceed towards the potential of invincibility. This applies to any kind of thoughts, however, and sadly doesn't favor us or them. The latest, but not least, part of the problem, as the biblical gods are currently figuring out, might be inherent to their version 1.1 design. As everything is round, whichever direction you walk away to, you can't avoid getting back to the point in space where you began.
The best time to set out on such an adventure is on a summer day.
You might argue that a point in time can never be repeated, and therefore no two points can be exactly the same, as time will have lapsed in a trip between the two.
A new world comes to be.
However, Memory is frail, and truth brittle.
There was a quiet Tuesday afternoon, and the TV was on. The film showed a small white airplane crashing into the White House. Hollywood, I thought, is a legend at reviving different realities, and wow, who would have come up with such violence? We are so fragile and broken, and as though a brain with me rises in weeks of thinking, my mind is breaking.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mbak Tintin. Please, one more time, please give a warm round of applause. And so, yeah, we're going to the next session of the event, which will be a Q&A, and it will be moderated by our Museum Macan director. So I'd like to call Aaron Cito to the stage.
Is it not working? There you go. I think that's for you.
Oh, you've got your mouse.
I got mine.
Hello. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, let's have another warm round of applause for Tintin.
Oh, thank you. Thanks.
It's a really dense and expanded presentation because I can see in this particular work the relationships to lots of other work of yours that you've been developing over at least, I would say at least 15 years, if not more. I mean,
guess so,
even this particular text you said was something that you developed 6 years ago. So it's, you know, that's really interesting in the way in which you've been able to weave your own work back into the work, and as somebody who's been watching your practice over that period of time, it's quite fascinating to see some of those ideas become much more clear now. And I think
that's thank you.
But I'm just going to start by saying it's really difficult to do a Q&A after an artist performance. It's almost the exact opposite thing that you should do, but this is, as Tintin and I discussed a little bit earlier, or yesterday, is that it's an opportunity, I think, for us to discuss some of the, or she wants us to have a little bit of a discussion about some of the themes and ideas that are inside this work. I'm just going to start by maybe giving some immediate responses because, like you, this is the first time that I've seen this presentation. I was lucky enough to be able to read through your text prior, but of course it's very different to see the kind of overlay of the media and your interaction with the media. And I think that again, that's this it's this idea of being able to weave past thoughts and ideas right back into this very present moment. So some of the key things that I took away from that is number one, that is a kind of this weaving of time. And it appears in this work in other ways as well. There are a number of threads that are very personal in terms of relationship to family and family's relationship to history. And there is also this imagination of other narratives, like this idea of the space traveler. I think that's probably one way to describe it, which is fictional, but perhaps not so distinct from the reality in which you've set up within the text as well. And then I think that probably one of the most important things in this work that I was thinking about as you were talking is this idea of the imagination. And imagination as having probably two components to it. So the ability of individuals to imagine different realities, or the ability of individuals to imagine different, or to discern truth in different ways, not alternate truths, but to be able to discern the truth in a different way. And I think that that really emerges from a relationship of the individual in contact with the state. So following somebody like Apadurai, for instance, that the important, well, the role that the small individual has in being able to imagine different political futures or different political presence through the function of the imagination. So they're some of the key things that I think that I've taken away from this. I'm not going to let you speak yet.
Okay.
But why don't we? I'm curious about what. Let's open up to the floor first before we ask Tintin to speak. Maybe there are some specific questions that you have about this work. Maybe there is a. Maybe you want to share an experience of the work. Do we have anyone from the floor willing or game enough to stand up first? No, we don't. Okay, so I'm going to let you speak.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Why don't we go? Let's talk a little bit about some of the technical components of this. Where did it start from? Like, that was my observation of the work. But where did you come across? Where did you think about this idea of doing this type of performance lecture?
Okay. I think. In, let me see, 2008, I was invited to a conference. It was called Indonesia 10 Years After. It was held by KITLV and the University of Amsterdam. And so I was amongst a panel of anthropologists and historians, and I was an artist. And so 2008, I think I've just started my PhD at that point. And so I thought, okay, I need to, present myself in a format that's specific to my field and to what I'm doing, basically. And so thinking about Indonesia 10 years after in 2008, and so that's 10 years after. So I thought, okay, that was actually sort of something that sparks my practice as well. So the Jakarta riots of May 1998 was something that started me questioning about 1965. So that was a starting point. And so basically, I didn't know too much about 65, didn't know too much about 98, who does? And so I sort of mined my experiences and put it into some kind of a performance lecture format. And for me, it's practically bringing, with this format, I have the flexibility of mixing a lot of things together. And so, that performance lecture at that point was more facts-based, but over time I started thinking about more, like mixing things as well. So yeah.
You've spent so much time outside of Indonesia. Probably you're maybe better known outside of Indonesia than you are inside, in terms of the contemporary art world, I would say. So do you think that your perspective on 65, 98, is that different being outside of Indonesia than it is being here?
It's interesting because I think I found that it was easier to talk about 65 outside of Indonesia. And because it's easier to talk about 1965 outside of Indonesia, it was easier for me to learn more about it. So, I think that's the answer. That's a very short answer. One of the reasons I sort of, well, left Indonesia, although I never left, was that I didn't want to be kept here. So I wanted to be able to be elsewhere. And so, yeah, so that's one of the reasons I applied for an Australian permanent residency in, when was it, 2002, I think I did. And I got it in 2003, and that's, well, I mean, the first 5 years was, you know, like I was still a lot in Indonesia, doing a lot of projects in Asia and Europe, nothing in Australia. And it was, the motivation to do the PhD was actually to sort of, okay, you know, I should live in Australia. And how? Well, one of the ways was to do a PhD, which motivates me to be there and allowed me to be there as well. So yeah.
I wonder if you might also, because I think that it's a very, you have a very, very distinct practice in the sense that the kind of research that you do is historical. At the moment, you're working through some quite large and complicated archives. And your current research projects are located not within arts or visual arts institutions, specific visual arts institutions. So I'm wondering if you might talk a little bit about your research process and how that this influences what you produce. Because what we have seen here, we've seen drawing, I would say. So do you think that your perspective kind of video and media interplay, which is related different to being outside of Indonesia than it is being here? I'm wondering if you talk a little bit about your process and how
it's interesting because I think
whether or not you see these things as being distinct, or is it kind of
I found that it was easier to talk about 65 it's outside of Indonesia. Well, early in my because it's easier to talk about 1965 outside of Indonesia. I was known as a filmmaker. Easier for me to learn more about it. And at one point, quite early as well, I started thinking, oh, this is like keeping me in a box. It's a very short answer. And so similar to, you know, my one of the reasons I sort of effort to go out of Indonesia. It was also an effort to go out of this filmmaking left Indonesia, although I never left. And so was that so I started. I started thinking about other mediums as well, and I found that it was so I wanted to be able to because then elsewhere. I could think very specifically. Yeah, so that's one of the reasons I very specific for an Australian permanent residency. It have to be when was it? Films, I think, or videos. And so I got it in 2003, and that's so well. I mean, the first 5 years was I started actually trying to work with other mediums, a lot of projects in Asia and Europe, nothing in Australia. And it was only when I started my PhD, the motivation to do the PhD was given a studio sort of, that I started to be able to make more live in Australia, and that was really one of the ways. A great to do a PhD. Which what do you call that? To be there. Well, a great opportunity to say the least, because I felt that I learned a lot through making.
Because I think that it's a very
and so when
you have a very, very
I had more mediums,
in the sense that
I felt that I learned more. Actually, and I love learning. That's one thing that I keep.
At the moment, you're working through.
If someone puts me in a box of people who love learning, then I'm happy. I don't need to go out of that box.
Research projects
so and each time, each project, I can actually, with this kind of flexibility, I can explore other mediums and everything. And so
I'm wondering if you might talk a little bit about your
so it's liberating.
process and
You
how
wanna
that
talk a
this,
little bit about the
influences
current research
what you
Well,
your,
present
what we have
myself.
seen here,
because I think that it does provide
so,
a good
so do you think that your
foundation
perspective
for
kind of
some
video and media
issues that we deal with in this
which is
work?
related
Different
to
being
one, I think one of the very strong things about I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about your process and how
It's
that
interesting because I think
whether or not you see these things
how
as
we
being
might
distinct or is it
imagine
kind
I
of that
found that
reality?
it was easier to talk about
maybe
Indonesia.
explain a little bit about the research
It's,
and how that this
well, early in my because it's easier to talk about. So I was known as a filmmaker this way more about it. That I started at one point quite early as well. I started thinking, this is like giving me a box. And so similar to my one of the reasons I sort of effort to go out of Indonesia. It was also an effort to go out of this filmmaking. So in Indonesia, although I never left. This was made in 2018. Was that after I started, I started thinking about other mediums as well, and I found that it was so I wanted to be in 2001 Martian Nights. I could say maybe it's then I could think very specific, sort of. So that's one of the reasons I very specific for Indonesian Indonesian have to be masculines of 1965 or videos out to the global, and I got it in 2003, and that's and looking at it the first like not something isolated actually that was trying in Indonesia, work with other something that's a lot of projects in Asia and Europe. It's one part of, but it was only when I started my motivation to political situation and of the world given a studio that I started to be able to make. And so that was 2017. That was really in 2018 when I made this piece. When I started writing this piece, which was trying to basically be there, develop on that. A great opportunity, to say the least, because try to get it closer. I felt that I learned a lot through making.
Because I think that this is it's
so
a
that
very
was 2018, and then 2019 more maybe I made other works. I felt that I learned more subtext after Kawaru, and I love learning. That's one that's also that I keep looking at other mediums, learning. If someone puts me in a box of people who love learning, then I'm happy. And I don't need to go out of that box. And each time the base form I can protocols actually with this kind of flexibility. So the project is other mediums and everything, and so
I'm wondering if you might
distance
talk a little bit about
and
your
so it's liberating
warfare process and how
and practically there are a few things that I wanted to do present the project. I wanted to sort of maybe go back a little bit. In 2015 I started with other friends. I started this collective called 1965 Setiap Hari, and we collect because we are collecting as well still narratives from. I found that it was easier to talk about. We put it on social media. We put it on early in my because it's easier to talk about. So I was known as a filmmaker. We have this more about that. And at one point, quite early as well, I started thinking, this is like and so similar to my one of the reasons I sort of effort to go out of Indonesia. It was also an effort to go out of this filmmaking. So in Indonesia, although I never left. So the project actually brought together after I started. And so I learned about other things as well. But then at the same time, I found a lot about so I wanted to be in 2001 Martian, and I'm still learning now. Maybe it's then I could think very specific, sort of the younger one of the reasons bring very specific, really Indonesian those actually don't know about 1965. I mean, there were questions like, what is 2003 and 6 of May? And looking at it, thinking that like 6 and 5, like 9/11, 6/5 in Indonesia, work with other that kind of thing. But also one part when we post on social media, only when I started my motivation to political situation of the world, I can say that there are people that I started to be able to make. And so that was 2018. and that went on, and then in 2018 when I made this piece, and then when I started writing never know the truth, what we want to basically develop also great opportunities and responses because try to get other works closer. I felt that I learned a lot through making the act of killing. So that was just a lot of, and then the viewers made other works. I felt that I learned more subtext and I love learning. That's one thing that I keep looking at other seen as something that, if someone puts me in a box of people who love learning, then and so this is something so these project and each built the base for is trying to actually move this kind of forward flexibility. So the project for other mediums and everything, and so distance it's trying to its liberation warfare emphasize practically that there is actually a few things that I want that has been declassified and I want to publicize in 2008. So if you think about back to this in 2015 and that we will never know the truth, no, I don't think that's valid anymore. I started this because we have this 65 this record we collected because and then secondly found that in easier to talk about. We put it early in my course it's easier to talk about, so I was known as thinking more about that. And at one point, quite early as well, going to the stage of thinking, this is like so similar to, my one of the reasons I sort of effort to go out of Indonesia, it was also an effort to go out of was filming. So in the archive, this was mainly the project actually brought together and so I learned thinking about what kind of I found a lot about so I was from the US the embassy 2001 Martian, and I'm still learning now. Maybe it's then I think very especially sort of the younger one of the really there is international relations. It's not only actually don't know about right. So it was the question we're going to do what is website in the US and looking at thinking that like 6 so now we're talking about that kind of thing and the word also when we post but it was only when I started the comments again of the world that I started to be example and so that went on and then I think I was in 2008 when I made this and then when I we will never know we don't know what we're going to be develop also this is so because the process of closer I felt that I learned a lot through the act of killing. This is what I was so when then viewers said that every time there were I felt that I learned more subtext. It's a transaction and I love learning. That's one that's also that I keep looking at other seen as something if someone puts me in a box of people who love learning, then I found that there are and so this is something so the project and each built the base for is trying to actually move this kind of talking about not being so the first the work is actually not here but in this it's and actually there and anyway practically there are a few things that I want that has been documented that I want to publicize and these are withdrawn because so if you think it's back to this and the process realization but we will never know which time the process I don't think that I started this because we going to be done the documents are reviewed official and then second they will decide this is all that in here to talk about put it originally put it early in my course these talk about so I think we should I was now thinking more about thinking about those and at one point decided early going to the stage we might like so similar to my one so and then I was out of Indonesia it was also an episode so I will still so in what I did so the project actually brought together the data so the document about what kind of data I found a lot about so I was from the US and so I 2001 one Martian, and I'm still learning how actually. I think so, especially sort of, also that the younger one of the reasons why there is international, and it's not only actually don't know about it, so it was the question that we're going to go on. What is actually big and looking at thinking that, you know, like now we're talking about that kind of thing, and the word also when we post but it is only one comment performance and also the that we're monitoring I think that in 2018 when I made this and then when I we will never know if and also the process of decluttering I felt that I learned through by doing that but also and then you were saying that every time there were I thought that space for emotions it's a transaction because I love learning that's one that's new that I keep looking at it's seen as something inside my put something in a box of people who love learning then I found that there are and so this is something so the project and each build the base project is trying to actually move this kind of talking about not being so the first floor the work is actually and not but in like it's and being actually there and anyway so there is there are a few cases that has been documented that published and these are because I mean so if you think the basic fact of this and the process realization that we will never know which time the process I don't think that I started this because we know it before the documents are reviewed official and then secondly we found that the thing here to work well there is actually those early hypothesized these documents I think we should I was thinking about those and one thing I decided early going to science we might like so actually my one so that was sort of and then out of the it was also an episode so in the project actually brought together so the document about what kind of I found out about that I was from the UN and it's 2001 and I'm still learning I think so actually sort of also that one of the reasons why there is international and it's not only actually don't know about it so it was the question we're going to go on what is actually and looking at thinking that like now also talking about that kind of thing in a way and also when we post but being explore what makes it really interesting is also that we're going back to the different and going forward maybe also another project on I feel that this kind of aiming is what I derive when that but also and then you were saying that sort of I mean I do read it's a transaction because I love that's one because it's a principle it's seen as he doesn't know what taming is and the fox detailed it and it's really what I felt was happening when I was working with the cardboard waste in Hong Kong for example the fox says okay taming is sort of like he doesn't define it but he gave examples so for example if you want to tame something or someone sit closer to it every day at the same time and then it becomes a pattern and then once you're closer you get closer physically as well and then and then you become friends and then what's really touching as well is in the Little Prince in the story of the Little Prince at one point the fox had to leave and then the little prince was crying, of course, he was sad, and he was like, oh, see, this is your fault. This is your fault, and now I'm crying, I'm sad that you're leaving. But the fox says, oh, well, you know, it's part of life. And also, you know, now, like if, oh, sorry, the little prince was leaving. Oh, well, okay, you should read it. Anyway, but someone was leaving, one of them. And then the fox says, well, you know, I'm okay, because before I knew you, the wheat field is just a wheat field. But now, when I look at the wheat field, I remember your hair. And before I met you, the stars are just stars. But now, when I look at the stars, I remember you. So yeah, I think that's...
Well, thank you. We've probably got time for maybe 2 questions. So if there are any questions from the audience. Yes, please, at the front.
Hello, Tintin. The presentation was really amazing, and I really enjoyed your work. And I have a question related to, since we were discussing a lot about visual documentation, photographs and films, how they contribute to shaping the reality that we perceive. I noticed that you experimented a lot with audio and storytelling. So I wanted to ask how oral passing, or like, especially in Indonesia, folklore, passing it down from one person to another through word of mouth, how that contributes to history and collective memory that is unrecorded or undocumented by archives, or maybe lost to the public, you know. And yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. I guess that's what I referred to actually when I talked about that genetics are not merely physical. So if our brain can believe that we exist just because of chemistry, then you know genetics are not merely physical, and how stories are passed down or around actually makes us connected as well. And so for me, my experience of familial relationship, for example, is sort of similar as well. So oral history sounds very official, but then you know, like when it's passed down in families, it's sort of making the family as well, right? And so the resulting family is actually a documentation of it as well. And also when it's going back to stories about 65, it was really difficult for my family to talk about it, still now. And that's why I started going out as well. And I learned a lot from other people who became sort of that family. And going back to imagination and Apadurai and thinking about Ben Anderson as well, the imagined community, I think that also relates to that. These oral histories and these narratives and storytelling, that's really important in building up these communities and nations, and actually the world as well. And so this is why I think we should not be trapped in the territory that, you know, like, oh, we're Indonesians and we only do Indonesian things. If we kill people, it's only within Indonesia, you know, like this kind of thing. Political scientist John Agnew talked about the territorial trap, and that's when we think that nation states are the territory that it's so old and it's not old. It's like only maybe a century or so. And so, you know, and of course territories keep changing as well. And so, yeah, so I hope, thank you for your questions. It helps also thinking about this, you know, like putting this together as well. Thank you.
I think we have time for one last question. I thought no? Okay, with that, I mean, it's really a great pleasure to be able to host you here, Tintin. It's a very special afternoon that we've been able to share, or you've been able to share with us. Thank you for your time, thank you for the work, and thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you so much, Aaron.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you,
Please
Nin.
give one more time round of applause for Tintin and Aaron. So, as mentioned by Mbak Tintin, if you want to see the work Memory is Frail and Truth Brittle and other works by Tintin Wulia, it's currently on exhibition at Bike Art Gallery, Jakarta. And also, please check out the exhibition, Voice Against Reason. It also explores the intersection between politics, history, and art, and also the role of artists in voicing these issues. So yeah, please take your time. And also I'd like to inform for our members, we will have another round of members tour starting at 3:30. So after this session is finished, please make your way for the members tour. It's gonna be led by our team of curators. So once again, thank you and have a good weekend, everyone.
Thank you so much, everyone. Oh, thank you. Thanks a lot. Yeah.
I'm going to take a picture. Okay.
Oh.